suspect who's homicidal. He's already killed his grandmother, and I think it may have been like his nephew. And he just gets in his car and starts driving, and he's just like doing like a homicidal rage. Hits a guy on a motorcycle. The guy loses his leg. From the crash, he walks into this little neighborhood in Shoreline. He finds a little old lady in his backyard that's doing some gardening and just beats her to death with a shovel. Goes to another, tries to assault. She's able to get away from him, walks into a house, tries to assault some guys. They chase him off. He flees and he goes into a house. And unfortunately, the house he goes into, the guy is like the ultimate gun collector, which means he has guns and ammo in every room in his house. I am retired Sergeant Don Gulla.
Don, can you give the viewers, listeners, a little bit of background about yourself?
So I'm a lifetime Washingtonian. I grew up in a little city called Pacific, Washington, which wasn't the best part of town. I went through both the Auburn School District, then the Kent School District, and so I have like 5 brothers and sisters, so a pretty large family. And probably the most notable thing in background as far as schooling is I think the only reason I graduated from high school is sports. So I'm a big sports guy. So I was lucky in high school that they had good sports programs. I also was lucky enough that Kent Meridian High School has the longest or the oldest judo program in the United States. So I didn't know it at the time. You know, I thought like everyone has judo programs, but you know, my GPA was not that high. I did do some community college classes. In fact, when I got into law enforcement, I knew I wasn't that great of a report writer. So I went back to community college, kind of upgraded it to make sure I could, you know, carry on at least doing good reports, which is a critical part of law enforcement. And met my wife when I was 19 years old, working as a bouncer at one of the earliest discotheques in the Northwest. I was a bouncer, and I think being a bouncer there is probably where I learned a lot of my verbal skills, because it was probably the most diverse environment. It was off Rainer Avenue, if you know that. So we have a large, so imagine 300 teenagers of black, white, Japanese, Chinese, Filipinos, Hawaiian, Samoan, right? And sometimes it didn't get along, and that's why they brought in fact, 5 black belts become security, because the place would get torn up all the time. Renton police would get there and break it up. In fact, that's one of the first active shooter I was involved in, was a security guy, bouncer there, when we had kicked out a bunch of Samoan guys, and later they hired a guy to come up from California to kill one of the bouncers. So it ended well. We blocked the doors. I had my little can of pepper spray. They were breaking the glass to try to get in with the gun, but it didn't go sideways. But I think back on now that all the stuff that I learned talking to different diverse groups kind of made it a lot easier for me later on as a law enforcement officer.
So was there anything in your history growing up, Don, that kind of drew you to law enforcement?
Well, my oldest brother had been with King County Sheriff's Office, the same as me, for I want to say 35, 36 years. So he was actually hired, and again, it was one of those, hey, come and do a ride along. And at the time, I was working as a machinist at a company called Belshaw Brothers. So the joke is that I got to work for this company that's the largest manufacturer of donut machines in the world. So that was my prerequisite to get into law enforcement, because they would throw away dumpsters of donuts. That's kind of a side joke. But so my brother, I did a ride along, and I said, this is kind of cool. And at the time for King County, they would test out at probably 1,200 applicants for maybe 5 positions. So I was fortunate to be selected and get hired by King County, and that was in 1984.
Okay, so King County Sheriff's Office.
Yes.
And you worked for King County Sheriff's Office from 1984 to 2017. Can you explain a little bit about how it was in 1984 when you came on?
So in 1984, I came on looking at the academy curriculum. It was very straightforward, pretty militaristic, and the academy was run by Seattle Police Department. So basically, it's a pretty large agency, and it was interesting because a lot of the instructors that were in the academy were kind of the bad boys of Seattle, which was, I look back on it with a passion, and I love my TAC officer, but some of the stories they would tell you were the most valuable because it kind of told you sometimes, do this, but don't do what I did back in the day. So it was always interesting, and I really look back on those days. It was really nice. But as law enforcement changes, we've moved forward, and looking at, that was the era where pretty much it was, using your presence as much as possible to get things done. And depending on where you work, with King County, you usually have backup, but some of the smaller agencies coming through the academy, it's like a 3 to 5 man department. So it kind of changes on what they can do.
So I'm assuming in 84 when you started, you were on patrol.
Yep.
Okay. What was a typical call back in 84 in the King County area?
So I started in, I guess it would be considered like SeaTac area back in the day. And when I came on, it was like everyone was looking for the Green River Killer. So I was working in the area. We're out trying to do as many tip sheets as we can. So everyone, I remember, had a big folder of all the tip sheets and everything we're doing. And so in that district where I was working, I can remember running call to call the entire time. It was a busy district. So working swing shift is usually the busiest. So you're either going to burglary call, shoplifts, car accident. But the nice thing about doing that is that it gives you a lot of experience over a short period of time.
Yeah. Okay. And so tell me a little bit about your career progression. 84, you start driving a patrol car.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of what happens?
So started patrol in I guess it would be SeaTac, or what they call Southwest District for King County. So I did patrol. I ended up moving to Federal Way, which is now a contract city, and loved Federal Way. We worked out of this little trailer, right? They call it a substation back then. And it was really nice because that's where the kind of the camaraderie really picked up, to where the people next to you, what's going on. You learn who the bad guys are. And it was a little bit different environment than Southwest. They had the big SeaTac mall. Everyone liked hanging out there. There wasn't that many businesses there are currently in Federal Way. But so I did my patrol for just about 4 years. And then I switched over to what they call special operations. And at the time, I was assigned a traffic unit. So the traffic unit, basically writing tickets. I was in a car where a lot of the other traffics were on motorcycles. One of the interesting parts of being on the traffic vehicle division, as far as patrol cars, is that you're assigned to the DUI squad. So we call what's called wolf packing, and that means you take 4 officers and you go out, you saturate an area, and your sole job is to take DUIs off the street or assist patrol with taking DUIs. And I did more DUIs in that short period of time, and I learned a valuable lesson that the reports that you write will end up in court, because even though at the time DUI was like a gross misdemeanor, it was the most litigated charge out of anything. I mean, there's a whole industry. But after you get respect from doing good reports, after a while you show up because you have to wake up, right? Because you're working graveyard shift and get up and go to court half asleep. And when they see you walk in the door, to go like, nah, we'll stipulate or we'll do deferred, because you do good reports. In fact, when I first started doing the DUI patrol is when they were suppressing the BAC machine. So a lot of people depend on doing, we got to get this BAC reading. Well, I found you write better reports, you still get convictions without it, because if we're not going to allow it in the court, you better have good driving, you better have good FSTs, and even some excited, utterance that they may say, of how many beers they've had.
So can you explain the difference between patrol and then you go to the special operations group? Was the special operations group only focused on DUIs, or what was the goal, or what was the mission?
In special operation is where all the SWAT team guys are at, but it was primarily motors and cars, bomb units, right, was part of it too. So if you're doing, you may be on a motorcycle, but if you get a SWAT call, they're going to go out and they're going to respond to it. So that was the special operations when I got hired. It changed over the years, but it was dedicated to specialty units that they needed to get the job done. And it was more ancillary duties. So in 1990, as part of just the traffic division of special operations, they had to bump up the amount of SWAT officers because they had this event called the Goodwill Games in 1990. So I got a chance to go to SWAT school, and we got more specialized training. So I would say it's comparable to like the training you'd go for the Olympics, because we're responsible for going in as part of the anti-terrorist group. We did helicopter training. You had to be able to move in and deploy in a certain amount of time. So there was a group that would stage at the King County Airport. So if something occurred, you could fly to Tacoma, right, to Seattle, because all the venues were spaced out, just like the Olympics. So that was interesting. And because after that, I went back to regular traffic because it was only for that event.
So when you went back to regular traffic, though, were you, at that point, were you on the SWAT team?
No, well, I was on the SWAT team until the Goodwill Games were over.
Oh, okay.
Because they only hold so many positions. And then once it was done, they brought it back down to where the normal level was. In 1990, after that, that's where I got the opportunity because, again, the academy was run by Seattle Police Department, and some of the agencies were saying, we want to see more different types of teaching based on different types of academies. So a small agency, medium agency, or large agency. So I was one of the first three outside of Seattle to go to the academy. This was kind of their test. So I think they kind of sent us there to spy on Seattle, but truly we got along with them so well that when we came back and gave them the report, like, they're doing a good job, they still went with the multi-jurisdictional cadre, which is the model they use now. So the interesting thing about from 1990 to 97, the changeover from Seattle to all the other agency was interesting because I started as a TAC officer, which is monitoring the recruits in the academy. Roll call, graduation, discipline, evaluations, that was kind of my job. But as each instructor left, so instructor that was Seattle goes back, he was teaching criminal investigations. So they would go, here's the information, you better be ready because you're teaching it tomorrow morning. I go like, what? So I learned, and then it went through all these different, then next one is, oh, the traffic guy left. You're teaching it. Here you go. Get up on this straight, right? Crisis intervention. Here you go. Going. And then finally I got to the one I wanted to teach was defensive tactics. So you had to move through all these different stages, but I think it gave me a good depth of understanding all the different subject matters. And so I think I ended up training about 2,400 recruits through the academy from 90 to 97, which was fun because now I can go somewhere, anywhere in Washington State, and usually they're higher ups now because they've been or retired.
Okay. So in 2017, when you end up retiring, you retire as a sergeant. So your entire career, you've pretty much been an officer.
Yes.
Was there no thought of promoting and rising up through the ranks, and if not, why?
So once I left the academy in 97, I was assigned to it changed back to special operations where I left, but now the SWAT team had become a full-time unit. So the full-time unit means that you don't generally go out and shag, patrol calls, but as part of that, the ancillary duties became what we call the tactical training unit. So doing anything from defensive tactics to the civil disturbance, riot control, firearms training, and then in 2000, 2001, they had this device called the Taser that came out. I became the Taser coordinator, which was interesting because I saw the company from when it had like 7 employees to where it is now, and going from the M26 to the X26 to the X26, we went to X2. Now it's the Taser 10 that we're training on now to test it. So going through all those years of the early days where you said do it often and early to prevent injuries, to like, yeah, maybe we don't want to like tase someone when they don't sign the ticket. So it was interesting because it was really use it a lot here. Now where we're at now, we use it with a lot more justification, but in the early days it was kind of crazy. And so I was on the SWAT team and Taser coordinator and civil disturbance instructor, DT instructor, firearms instructor. And then I looked at my brother again. He's saying, hey, I'm going to take the sergeant's test. So again, I go like, well, that'd be kind of fun. So, and I truly did not study that much. And I thought I'd just go in and take the test. And lo and behold, I get through the oral boards and everything, and I get on the list and I get promoted. So I become a patrol sergeant. I start in the North Precinct and work my way back to the Maple Valley Precinct, to where I was there for, I want to say, 3 years as a patrol sergeant, until I saw a listing for a new position called the CIT coordinator for King County. It's all King County agencies. And I put in for it, and what I didn't realize is that no one else put in for it anywhere. So it was like by default, I got it.
And Don, just for the listeners and viewers, what is CIT?
So CIT is Crisis Intervention Team Training. And back in the day, we're talking like, 2010 to 2011, no one knew what CIT was. So we created a brand new program from the bottom up. Now CIT, we're going like 13 years down the road, is everyone has to have it. Back in the day, no one understood it, but I had kind of a mentor named Liz Eddy from Seattle Police Department who had a CIT program, and we used kind of their model to come in. She was one of their hostage negotiators, so she had a large background. We brought in another contact expert called Ellis Amder, who's one of the individuals that can mimic different people in crisis, scary enough that students on the break would step out in the hallway and go like, is he on medication? And I'd always joke like, not this week. So they'd always kind of freak out, but he's actually a good friend and one of my instructors for wrestling too. So I did that until I retired in 2017.
But Don, what was the goal? What was the function of the CIT? What do you guys do? So
the biggest thing with CIT, and a lot of people think CIT is de-escalation, and if you ask the head guys at CIT, it's that much de-escalation. The rest is about relationships. So what are my resources in the area? Because as a patrol officer, I cannot diagnose anyone. I can look at the behavior, and based on the behavior, make suggestions, because I don't know if it's drugs or maybe illegal drugs that they're supposed to be taking that they're not taking. So alcohol. So I will get them resources, but I have to kind of at least see where they're at. But if I go to the parents, so talking to a lot of parents as the coordinator, it's the United States right now is in a mental health crisis because they don't have enough facilities to put the most severely mentally ill in a place that they can get help. So where do they end up? Either in jail, right, ER, right, or just homeless on the street. So the problem is that we can do everything on our part, but where do we take them? King County is pretty rich with resources, but even for the most severely individuals in crisis, there's not enough beds. So we take them to the hospital, or we do an invol on them because of their behavior. They said, I'm going to complete suicide. And so we take them there. They know at the crisis connection point, there's not enough beds for them to go to. So we'll do their evaluation, and we may see them on the street before we do our paperwork. So we'll see the revolving doors. So it makes it difficult for us as law enforcement officers to try to get them the help they need without the end resources. We're getting better, but I think we still need to improve.
Okay. So Don, getting back to one of my original questions here. So you retire as a sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
Was there never any thought of becoming a lieutenant, a captain, or everything else? And if not, why not?
I like kind of being a trainer, and I think that once you see, there's not that many trainers that are above sergeant. In fact, there's not that many sergeants that are trainers, so it makes it difficult. In some agencies, lieutenants are like sergeants, so it's just a different rank. But I think that I didn't see me becoming like more administration. I like kind of doing the hands-on, so I'm a very hands-on person. So I will monitor the programs and suggest them, but if I'm teaching a class, I want to help teach the class. So that I'm more of a hands-on guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Before we go on, I want to talk a little bit about SWAT, because most people see SWAT movies and
Mm-hmm.
television shows and stuff like that. When you were on the SWAT team, what would be a typical call for you?
Typical calls. So in the 12 years on our full-time team, which most agencies, it's a part-time, so they don't do a lot of training. The full-time team, we did weekly training. We counted up, I think I had over 600 missions in 12 years. So typical could be doing a drug warrant. Typical call-out could be barricaded person. So we have a DV that's gone wrong, person's threatening with a weapon. So we're going to come in, they're going to set up containment, they're going to bring in H&T or crisis negotiation team, and we're going to try to negotiate and get the person out. But typical calls could be just that. The person is creating a dangerous environment, we get called out, but a lot of barricaded individuals, usually with weapons.
Okay.
Would be.
Any interesting calls or incidents that you can remember that you can talk about?
So probably the biggest one that sticks in my mind is I think it was Labor Day weekend or Memorial Day. I can't remember which one, but we're doing training at the Kent Fire Training Center, and I'm getting ready for the 3-day weekend. So you know how busy traffic is in the Seattle area, and we're joking around, starting to pack up gear, and our pagers go off. And I go like, oh, it looks like we got a big call, just kind of joking around. And we look, it's like shots fired, officer down, and it's in Shoreline. Well, from Kent to Shoreline is a pretty good code run. Add that the traffic is stopped on I-5. It was the worst code run because it was a 1033 officer needs help. So the back end of that call, what's happening is that there's a suspect who's homicidal. He's already killed his grandmother, and I think it may have been like his nephew, and he just gets in his car and starts driving, and he's just like doing like a homicidal rage. Hits a guy on a motorcycle, the guy loses his leg. From the crash, he walks into this little neighborhood in Shoreline. He finds a little old lady in his backyard that's doing some gardening and just beats her to death with a shovel. Goes to another, tries to assault. She's able to get away from him, walks into a house, tries to assault some guys. They chase him off. He flees and he goes into a house. And unfortunately, the house he goes into, the guy is like the ultimate gun collector, which means he has guns and ammo in every room in his house. But no one knows that. So we're looking for the guy that's committed homicide, and Diana Russell ends up driving up by where they think they had seen him, and she's on one side of the car, and he puts a rifle round through one window to the other window and hits her in the head, right? She goes down, she survives. So this is all while we're responding, and everyone's looking for this guy, and he's now shooting out different windows at everyone that's responding. So you talk about all the other agencies are going, no cross communication. Seattle drives their peacekeeper because Seattle SWAT's closer, and they pull up in front of the house, get Diana out of there and everything. And the guy puts like rounds, accurate rounds right where the guy's head is on the bullet resistant glass, and they're like, holy cow. So this goes on for multiple hours. We come in and switch out with Seattle PD SWAT team, and I can remember I have a position on one of the corners, and there's like a fence between us and the house, and he's taking shots at different officers he can see, and we have so I'm assuming I'll hear him come over the fence, right? Because it's going to take a while to get over it. Well, what I didn't realize is that my side of the fence is this big. On his side of the fence, he could have just jumped over, which afterwards, because I had to guard the firearm he had in the backyard that he dropped after we shot him. But our snipers set up on him, and as he's shooting, Don Ellis and Brett Naylor were in the back, and they could see a guy with a gun, but they wanted to know if it was him. They wanted a physical description of if there's any owners there. So that opportunity's early, but they wanted to make sure they weren't shooting the homeowner who was also in the house. And then as it goes hours down the road, we have like a go team that's set up to try to approach the house and get in if they need it. But right now it's just him. So they see him sneak out of the garage through the little slots in the fence. And as they see him, they start to approach him, and he just starts lighting them up through the fence as they're trying to get him, and he flees back into the house. So he was truly very, very homicidal, and he finally peeks his head out the back, and our marksman takes a shot. They drop in. They use the robot to go on and check. But that was pretty much at the time one of the bigger ones that I remember. It was.
What year did that happen in?
I'm going to say in the 2000s. I'd have to look, but they actually did a remake on America's Most Wanted over, like they redid it because it was kind of a big deal at the time.
Okay.
Not really accurate, but it still looked cool.
Okay. So we're going to take a little different tact with you now. So you have a background in martial arts. When did that start? So I give my mom credit that she must have saw something. Either we were getting into trouble or stuff with in the neighborhood, but she started taking us to boxing when we were 10 years old. So me and my older brother were doing boxing, and we were actually and at 10 years old you don't know how good you are, but we boxed for, I want to say, maybe about a year, and I never lost a fight as an amateur boxer. And one of the guys because I didn't have that many fights, but when I left and came back, I kind of checked with some of the people I boxed before, and they turned out to be pretty good. But I thought it was a good experience, and the boxing carried forward, later on as a part of the striking. But I wrestled throughout junior high, high school, and the judo program is really what kind of brought me up. So you have to go back to, in the 70s was like the Bruce Lee era. So everything you wanted was all about Bruce Lee. So if you put that in the context, you're doing judo, you got a gi, so that's close enough, right? So we're still out in the parking lot doing our own, fighting stuff and everything. But I'm going to turn this on real quick. I want to make sure that this is going. Okay. But I'm trying to find the guy that actually shot the video. We did our own little kung fu movie with all the judo guys. But the interesting thing about Camp Meridian Judo is that Doug Graham, who was my sensei, went through the judo program in the 60s. So if you go back to the 50s, his instructors were there through the program. Well, just about everyone on Sensei Graham's team all became national judo champions. So he won everything except a gold medal in the Olympics. He's now back at Camp Meridian High School. He's the math teacher. So see, these are things you don't realize. And he was this 220-pound Irish guy. I think I threw him one time, and I'm pretty sure it was a sympathy throw. But I ended up being, so I wrestled JV my junior year for Camp Meridian. And I took judo after that and went from the JV in 1 year to third in state on the state high school wrestling team. And judo was a big part of that because I could not shoot a double or single leg takedown to save my life. I mean, my junior year, I probably shot 7.
So I was pretty good at throwing. In fact, I developed a throw that they outlawed the next year, and I would give the guy the single leg takedown, and when they picked me up, I'd throw them on their back. And it took me a while to figure out how I did it, but then it became kind of one of my signature moves. But it was a little, they said it was a little dangerous because you kind of would hold the guy's head when you threw him back. But I won a couple big matches off that, but they outlawed it because they said it was too dangerous. But I took that philosophy kind of into training down the forward, because if something works that combines things together, you know, I did that throughout my career. So after high school, you know, I'm 20 some years old, actually, yeah, 19, 20, and I'm going like, I want to continue doing judo, but I'm out of school. So I became the sensei at a East Side Boys Club in Tacoma. So East Side Boys Club is kind of like where all the gang activity is, but in the day, you didn't really notice it. So I'm teaching judo at the boys club, and upstairs they have this kung fu karate class, and it's called Yama Nomad. And Yama Nomad back in the day were the renegades. So back in the day where everyone wore, you know, the traditional white gis with belts, and they're doing it, they wear like black pants with red t-shirts with Yama Nomad. So if you went to a tournament and you tried fighting, no one would give you a point because we don't believe in this. So I started training with Ed Lewis and got my black belt from him, but it was kind of a freestyle group. And in the late 80s and 90s was like the big PKA, like Professional Kickboxing Association. So you had like Bill Wallace and all the big ones back in the day, which a lot of people don't know. So Ed would bring them in, they would do their PKA fights. And I was lucky because I was only like a yellow belt in his system. And they're going to do like 5 rounds of different individuals, and they get a chance to fight Bill Wallace, right? And it's an exhibition fight. And he goes like, oh, you want to fight one round? I go like, it turns out I was supposed to fight on one of the cards, but I ended up kind of injuring my knee. So I couldn't do it, but he says, okay, I'll give you 1 round. So I got a chance to do 1 round with Bill Wallace. And it's kind of like one of those, you know, oh, I got a chance. I can't kick like him because he's like really flexible. But they brought in like Joe Lewis and some of the big guys throughout that training. And Ed Lewis was one of the first that actually started doing like Filipino stick fighting arts. So a gentleman named Kui Broca was one of the special forces trainer at Fort Lewis. So it would be only black belts in class, and we went through the RNS training. And I truly didn't understand how good Kui was, because we'd be doing stick fighting, and he would freaking jump up and do like a spinning kick over my head. I go like, where did that come from? Well, looking at his background, the Philippine government sent him as a teenager to all the different arts around the world to learn them and bring them back to the Philippines. So he was like the youngest master, like teenage master for different systems. So Taekwondo, Japanese Kajuken, all these things, right? But when he went back, he goes like, you know, Arnessa is still probably one of the best. So that's why I learned like a lot of this knife and stick stuff back in the day.
So Don, what if you have any? Right, I don't know how many belts do you have in what disciplines?
So Kodokan Judo, I'm a black belt, a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a coach level in CSW, which is combat submission grappling or wrestling under Eric Paulson. And a lot of the other ones, there's no belts. Well, there's a guy named John Blooming. So if you go back, he's like one of the old-time martial artists that was able to combine things together. He came over in 2000. Craig Jorgensen's longtime martial artist invited him over, and he comes to the academy where we're doing the Arrestling program. And he comes in and does some training with us. And he's talking to Jorgensen about like, this is what your training should look like. And he gives me like an honorary, like a 7th degree black belt. So I have it on my wall, but I haven't trained our system. But he realized of what we were doing at the time, that it was very progressive. And because I'm not good at katas and everything, but I can roll, I can fight. I did competitive karate and judo, so I was a junior Olympic gold medalist in judo. When I got hired with King County Sheriff's Office, they had I remember at the academy, it's like the Northwest Police and Fire Games, right? To where you can go in and compete in all these different sports. It was like just local for like the states in like Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Canada. And I was in the academy, so I couldn't go to the first one, but the next year I decided I was going to go. And they have all the different sports, and the closest one they had at the time was like weightlifting, because I did some bodybuilding and stuff, and I go, like, that's close. But I didn't understand what powerlifting was. And we learned the hard way that it's a lot more difficult than you think. But they also started the first year in 1985 called the World Police and Fire Games. So I look on there and they have karate. So I go, I've done karate before. I sign up. So from 85 to 2011, I go to a lot of the World Police and Fire Games. I end up winning like 5 gold medals. And over the years, so I went from like the young guy to the old guy. One of the more memorable, we were in Stockholm, Sweden. We had a combined Czech Republic in the U.S. I don't know how it ended up, but we ended up beating the Russians for the final, and it pissed them off so bad because it was the very end, and it was going for the gold, and we ended up beating them. And I don't think there's some hard feelings between the Czech Republic and the Russians, which I didn't understand, but that I think helped me because I'd always compete in the regional games. And in the regional games, they could have anything from basketball. So I did track and field. I was the slow guys, but I always got fast guys to run with me on the relay teams. Basketball, powerlifting, judo, karate. One year we actually even got stick fighting in it. But those kind of give you something to train for. And did that until my body got a little bit too old and broke. But still try to do, training.
Okay.
Down there.
Okay. So for the viewers and listeners, episode 16, I interview Chief of Meridian Police Department, Tracy Bastarachea. And during that interview, he keeps mentioning you and Arrestling. And I kept thinking, wrestling. And so I didn't put it 2 to 2 together until I actually looked your name up. And it's actually Arrestling, ARR. So you start Arrestling in 1990, right?
Yes.
Can you explain what that is?
So 1990, it started as a group of just instructors getting together, and sometimes it would be outside martial artists that would come in. We'd do some sparring, we'd do some stuff, but then we started crafting it to where let's make it specific for law enforcement. So realize in the 90s is right when the UFC started. So everyone's talking about this UFC fight. So we incorporated back in the day to where you could do stand-up, you could do ground. But when we started doing a wrestling, you wore a judo gi and a gun belt, right? And you could do stand-up, but you had to remember that your gun was there. So as instructors, we'd get in early, we'd work out, and then pretty soon the recruits said, like, we want to come and play too. So they would come in the morning, they would work out before classes. And over the years, because then patrol officers would come in and work out either before or after, and they would say like, hey, we had this guy, we couldn't get him in the backseat of the car. So that's where we started doing pressure testing and saying like, okay, show us what happened, pull a car up, figure out where the guy's at. And we evolved what tactics we had for situations that officers ran into. In 93, I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and we incorporated some of that. Judo, we do a lot of tactical falls with guns, but only using the techniques that were valuable. The nice thing about wrestling, even though it was started here at the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Center, is that once the students left or they became wrestling instructors, which most DT instructors go to a 1 or 2 week class, and they come back and they got their instructor certificate. So in the early days, it would bring me 2 shredded judo gis, shredded. To shred a judo gi takes a lot of rolling to do, right? But the other thing is that in your resume, you can't be a one-trick pony. You just can't be a black belt in martial arts. You need to be taser instructor, firearms instructor, anything you can add together, because I want to be able to teach everything. And that's, I think, what made us better. So going from 90s into the 2000s, we had UFC fighters calling to see if they can come and train with us in the evening prior to a UFC fight, because we were so good at what we were doing. They say we need this weight division, we need this type of skill, because some of our instructors were doing MMA fights against some of the top fighters. And we used what we could on the mats, but really we didn't want to be MMA fighters. So we tried to take a wrestling to what we call a mixed martial arts, just like the UFC, to where martial was spelled like U.S. Marshal, not like martial, because that's a difference. It's like, you're a martial artist, you don't have a gun. You put the gun on, now it becomes mixed martial arts. And so we actually did demos in Tacoma and Palm Springs to where two guys are fighting in the rings with gun belts, with simunitions, and they could do punching, striking. They got folding knives they can stab each other with. And each round would progress from, the first round could be just grappling, second round striking, last round guns coming out. We're going to maybe throw a shock knife out there. So it was really entertaining, but what we found, and I've kind of found this, is that most officers don't want to be MMA fighters. They don't want to be black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I do it because I like it, but to get most training, I want them to get in and do as much as they can, but everyone doesn't want to be the ace shooter. I mean, just getting people to the range to do it. We did a project for Bureau of Justice that was looking at where the current defensive tactics models, where they're at today. It was like a $750,000 project, and it did research on what do we teach at the academy, do you use what you've been taught in the academy, and what's your most common confrontation. So there's this big survey, and it comes back that most of the stuff they get in the academy, they never use on the street. The amount of time they have, they never learn it, and the average time for hands-on training in the U.S. is about 4 hours or less every year. So how do you keep your skills good with 4 hours of training? It's got to be very minimalized, and it's got to be something that's usable. That's the biggest problem.
And so what's the idea behind Arrestling?
Arrestling is kind of like the Jeet Kune Do of police training. It's just not one thing. So as a taser instructor, I've tased a lot, maybe 300 to 500 people, a lot of it in training. But we found things that work, and we incorporated it in the training, but it never stays still. So we have a group over in the Tri-Cities that trains. So when we have our officer safety conference, we get together, what are you guys using that you're using on the street? Then they teach everyone. Then it goes out to the other group. So we have a group in Shelton. So it keeps evolving, that it's not just here, but there's a new shooting tactic. So we bring in like the big firearms instructors that say, these are what we're seeing, these are the trends. You want to be better at shooting a rifle? Here's a tactic. So it's just not control tactics, but it's the full umbrella, because on the street, that's what's going to happen. So it's continuing, evolving, but it is frustrating that the current craze especially with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, everyone's going, oh my gosh, we got this new thing. 2023, my gosh, they're actually rolling around. And some people actually have guns, and we go like, yeah, let's go back like 30 some years ago. I think we're kind of using that. But if you're not calling it BJJ, people go, well, we can't use it. I'm going like, well, let me show you a couple things here that may help. And I know you have your 1 week certificate, but these are some of the things that may work.
So for you with your program, you're just teaching officers and departments?
Now it's changing. So we do, and it's funny because we're sliding over a lot to corporate. So there's a large software company in Redmond that we do monthly training, right? And what we're seeing is that the skills they have are better than the average officer because they do monthly training. In fact, every quarter we do mock scenes where they have to come in and do mock scenes. And so over the last couple of years, they're getting better because, and for the group that we're training, they have no firearms, they have no tasers, but they may have to step in and help based on what's happening. And they've had incidents where people, even there at the software company, have concealed weapons or a weapon available to them, and they have to be able to manage that person without weapons because now, so active threat, so we're doing a lot with even casinos, so active shooters, but the meet and greeters are the ones that are going to see what's happening. So we just did a bunch of training with DSHS, and that basically they're social workers that have to go out and talk to people that could be violent. So it's escape and evade. So now it goes across not just LE, but security, corrections, but a lot with hospitals right now because guess where they're taking all the people that are out of control, and a lot of security officers there are getting into fights every week, and they only have maybe handcuffs. So they need training more because they don't have the other tools. And if you call the police, they're not going to come in and do anything because that's why we brought them here. So see, that's kind of that catch-22.
So are you teaching only in the Northwest, or do you teach all over the country?
So one of my other jobs that I've done since I retired is I'm the National Training Director for Polis Solutions. So Polis Solutions started out of at the academy while I was here, they had a $40 million DARPA grant to go through a program called Tactical Social Interaction, or what they call kind of the friendly stranger. So it was to teach warfighters to go overseas and just not shove, shout, shoot. So they hooked up all the recruits to biometrics. They could see micro expressions. They could see what the officer was doing. They could see what the suspect was doing. And when that $40 million ran out, Jonathan Wender, who was a sergeant at a local police department, and Brian Landy, who was also an officer, were two of the head social scientists. They started Polis Solutions. That became the company that I'm the National Training Director for. And one of the first grants they got was, we did the first DOJ de-escalation program. It started in like 2016. So we traveled across the U.S. And so think back to 2016, 17, and walking into a room where no one understands de-escalation. So I remember one class we did in New Jersey. So we've done all these, Philly, Albuquerque, or Barrows, Alaska, which is up by 300 miles from. So it's a big spectrum of different agencies. But what we found out is everyone does the same job. It's just with different tools and different amount of officers on scene. But because we blended some of the tactics, so the T3 program is what we call it, tactics, and trust. So it incorporates all of them. So it's kind of like the CIT program. It just can't be trying to build trust, because if you don't have tactics with it, the officers just know you just want them to talk. So we taught that across the United States, and we implemented a program called Patrol Expert, which takes officers through specific video clips, and they have to make decisions on each decision point, but it's not like just watching a video and talking about it. So it stops, there's a timer, and it says, what are you going to do in the next 5 seconds? But it's timed, right? Just like on the street. Then it says, what did you observe? What would you change? What would you tell another officer, right? And so as it goes through this, we're trying to see if it improved the decision making, both tactically and verbally. And we did 2 research projects, one in Fayetteville and one in Tucson. And it came back and says, yeah, you can train people to make better decisions, but they have to do deliberate practice while they're doing it. You just can't watch a video, Because now it's like I got the suicidal guy in the street with a knife, right? That's going down there. And I'm now thinking 4 steps ahead, where before I was just saying, put the knife down, put the knife down. It's like block the intersection, call the supervisor, stage a medic unit, give me less lethal. That's what it incorporated, because it'd have to be the same scene, but it got them better. And they only did maybe 12 of what we call the TDEs.
So I would assume over the years of you doing the training that your training gets better, it changes. Give me an idea of, are there incidents that happen that you go, oh, that's going to make the training better, we've got to implement this? Are there any specific things? Do you watch the news? Do you watch incidents? Do you get different stories from departments that help you implement and make your training better or different?
So I think looking at research that we've done, and the ADAPT project looked at that. It asked officers what's the most common resistance, what's their favorite techniques, what works, what doesn't work. But for me, being a very practical person, it's kind of like, don't tell me, show me. Like if you have a technique and it works really good, let's go on the mat or let's go in the ring. But I have to measure that with the amount of time I have to train the individual. That's what makes it different. That if we could spend everyone doing, 20 hours of training every week, they're going to be good. But with the amount of time we have, we need to give them the biggest bang for their buck. So some of the big incidents. So I remember at the academy as a DT instructor, teaching techniques I knew would not work on the street. But it was the mandated straight curriculum, and that's what you taught. But when we were pressure testing, we were going like, this is never going to work. But you have to follow. So in our after hours classes, this is where the recruits would have a chance to come in and do some of the things that they couldn't get in the academy. And we really changed our philosophy on weapon retention after the Lakewood incident, right? Because we had the Lakewood incident, and we also had 3 officers killed in 18 months with their own weapons.
Can you talk a little bit about the Lakewood incident for people that don't know?
So the Lakewood incident was 4 officers in a coffee shop in the Lakewood area now, and there's a bad guy who really doesn't know them, hates law enforcement, and he goes in there and he ends up killing 4 officers. 3 are seated, one's up at the barista, but I know 2 of them very personally. So Tina, who was the first one killed that was shot in the back of the head, I was her TAC officer in the academy. Mark Renninger, he traveled to Sweden to compete in the world's toughest competitor, stud athlete, great SWAT guy. But I'm thinking in my mind, what could we do to increase his survivability in that same situation? Because I would say it's hard to fight an ambush, but what can we do to improve officers' reaction? So the biggest thing I learned from that incident, and we take this into our training now, is that where the bad guy shoots and where we shoot are 2 different places. So the suspect shot every officer to the head or the neck. The officer's 100% hit rate hit him in the torso, and yet he walked out of there, right, and likely would have survived without medical treatment. He was killed by a Seattle officer later. But that was the biggest thing, is that if we're targeting a location that we're traditionally to the torso, but it's not going to stop in the amount of time we have with a close quarter fight, what can we do to improve? So if we're going to shoot at close quarters, the headshot may be better to incapacitate. So we incorporate that into what we call our flinch draw, getting your head offline, whether seated in a car. And that was the biggest thing, because trying to play catch up at a close quarter shooting is difficult to do. But right now, when we do drills, we see the traditional training stars come in to where, and I'll give you an example of that. The suspect's over your right shoulder and start shooting, and we see officers in their chair try to turn around in a 2-handed stance to shoot them, because they're going back to their training versus just turning and shooting. So by doing the drills, the biggest thing we do as part of those drills is that we have someone draw from concealment over and over. So you're going to see 100 draws from the front, from the side, from the back. So it starts to prime them, or we call it kind of a schema, that they see that and they're actually faster by the end of the class. And it's not because they can draw faster, it's because they pick up that, oh, what's a person doing? And they start to act before it. So it's pretty interesting.
If there were any officers out there or any departments out there that are watching this video, how would they get a hold of you?
So they can go to www.arrestling.com, ARRESTLING, or from the spelling on the video, just type in Sergeant Don Gulla. It'll take you to some pretty interesting videos that will be entertaining as well as educational.
Okay. And just wrapping it up a little bit, questions that I like to ask all law enforcement people that I'm talking to. Did being in law enforcement affect your family at all?
I'm going to say probably not as much as most. I will talk about what happens. I'm not afraid to do it. And one of the things so I was on a critical incident stress management team for 20 years. That means if there's a critical incident, you get called out to the most. Officer died, someone got seriously injured, and we kind of teach them how to deal with, you're not going to sleep, you're not going to want to eat, you're going to, relive it over and over. So I kind of internalize those and use them myself to say, like, if I'm having issues, you need to talk to someone. And that's a big thing now that if you're trying to do the rough and tough and hard to bluff, because the worst thing we're seeing now is that I'll get a call from someone and they go like, oh God, so-and-so completed suicide. And then the next thing out of their mouth is go, oh yeah, we saw that one coming. And I'm going like, so why don't we step up and do something and say something? We'll step in front of someone to protect them from a bullet, but we won't sit down and have that candid conversation like, how's it going? How you doing? Bad things happening at home. And just like we'd ask anyone, are you thinking about killing yourself? I mean, it needs to be asked, but a lot of people are not comfortable doing it because I'd rather ask it before than they go to a funeral.
Okay. Okay. How about, if you can remember, because it's been a long time ago, when you first started the job, have your views on people in society changed from when you first started the job till when you retired, or even now for that matter?
I would say it's changed more since I've retired, which is kind of sad to say because it's like now you go to a barbecue in your neighborhood, you're talking to people and they want to bring up, what about this, what about that? And it's become, unfortunately, it's almost like us versus them. And one of the poorest things we do in law enforcement is educate people, because now with, if you look at just the left or the right side, all the things you're going to search now is going to come up in that view. So your view is never, it's skewed one way or the other way. And so really educating people on what we do and why we do it. We need to be better at it, but it's hard to fight social media. But I think educating people down the road is the way to do it. Or we see a lot of people posting positive things, but really, and as I go across the country and I talk to people in the airport, there's support for law enforcement. The majority of people support law enforcement, what they do. And in fact, every officer, I guarantee, someone comes up and go, hey, thank you, what you're doing. They pay for your meal before you even know they've done it. That still occurs, but those are not the people that are on social medias, putting their 2 cents in. So I say the majority of people are still out there. They like what we're doing, but can we improve? Absolutely. All right. And I think the training we're doing now is better. Getting the new officers and the old officers to get together. We saw the biggest division, and I want to say it was Detroit. So we're doing a train-the-trainer class. And as we're sitting there, we see like the young guns over here and the old guys over here. but they never sat together. And we had to actually force them to get together because there was still this division. And in Newark PD, they actually had it that the old guys could not give advice to the young guys, or vice versa, or you got written up. So if I give them an advice on how to do it, because they're trying to change the culture, but that's not the way they do it. So when we finally heard them saying, well, that's why you don't get backup, and we go like, whoa, okay, now we're drawing the line. So when we got back later, we're now mixing the groups together. But that's, yeah.
Well, why was that though? Why are the young people and old people not mixing together, or not associating?
Well, I think even when I came on, you kind of clung with the new people that come on. That's kind of it. Then, and the old guys are going like, well, I don't know if you got what it takes, we'll see if you can pass a muster. Then you prove you're good, and then they talk to you more. And as you go through it, then you become the old crusty veteran at, 10 years. Now, the average time on patrol across the United States as we're training, I'll say, what's the average time for the average patrol officer? It's less than 2 years. That's a senior person, right? So the sergeant maybe has 3 years on. And so now we have a big event. Who's going to ask who on what to do? My FTO, I'm a 2-year FTO. What do I know? And I'm going to give the advice to the person out of the academy. That's where we're at right now. And we have the wealth of knowledge that's now retiring, but no one's capturing that. No one's going back and going, give me the top 10 things you would do to make my job easier. But no one's asking. They're just out the door, screw it, I'm out of here. And so they're losing all that 20, 30 years worth of experience. And that's sad.
How about, I haven't spoken with a lot of East Coast people yet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you notice any difference between the training or maybe even police tactics that West Coast people versus East Coast law enforcement officers receive?
So I didn't truly understand, like here at the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Center, it's dedicated. They come here, they get training, right? You have to be hired. Then they send you to the academy. Most of the other places across the United States, you go to a community college and get your certificate, and you're probably not even hired. Then you go to a short and modified academy. And see, I didn't understand that. So the DT instructor could be at the community college and is a retired guy. So I didn't fully understand it until they go like, well, our academy here, and I go, you mean it's not run by the state? They go, no, you can pick from all these different colleges to go through. Also, there's other, like our DT program in Washington State is very robust. It takes you a couple of years to become a master defensive tactic instructor. I had never heard of PPCT in my life. So when I went other places, I go, what's that? And they kind of looked at me like, that's very, it's been around a long time, but I don't fully, understand it. But it kind of makes me understand why they do certain things, because that's the training they have.
But it would seem to me, based on what you're just talking about, that if you have all these different programs that you can choose from on the East Coast from community colleges, that without a centralized program, you really don't have a uniform training. Does that make sense, or am I? So
within the state, they have to match what the state wants them to teach, because that is their academy. So they have their crim just system. They have the person that runs it. They're going to teach criminal investigations, procedures, law. They may have a modified because even some agencies may teach different things for like vehicle pursuits and everything, or they may not even have it at all. But that's the biggest problem with law enforcement nationwide, is that there's no agreement on what is the standard across all the states and the amount of time you need. So we have someone that laterals from another agencies. We have to add certain things because the way they do it. So one of my pet peeves is that when we started doing handcuffing training, most of the agencies across the United States are taught to take their handcuffs, put it in their hands, walk up, try to get control and put the cuff on. the top cup. And I go like, what the heck? If you did that at our academy, you fail because you have no control, and that's where the fight's going to start, and you have your cuffs in your dominant hand. But that's, Fletchy teaches it that way, Ash teaches it that way, and it's like, so the stuff we take for granted is not the same across the United States.
Okay. Okay. One final question for you. As an outsider, I mean, I say as an outsider, but I worked in Seattle for a long time, but I haven't worked here in a long time. You see all these things that they talk about that are going on, particularly in Seattle. And for the viewers and listeners that don't know, King County is basically the county that covers Seattle and the general area. What do you think, or maybe this isn't true? I hear about all these bad things that are happening in downtown Seattle and just chaos that's going on. Is that true? And if that is true, what do you think has been the cause of that? Because when I worked in Seattle, Seattle was an absolute beautiful city. And it just seems like it's not that way anymore.
And so, and this is going through when I started traveling, doing the training across the United States, people would always talk about Seattle and say they're going to come and visit. I go, hey, great. And then it crossed over into, I'm embarrassed. I am personally embarrassed of Seattle myself. And so people are going to go like, wait, now's not the time to go to Seattle. And so when you compare like Seattle and San Francisco, a lot of commonalities. The biggest thing I see is that no one wants to hold anyone responsible for anything, right? So, and we're putting especially the most in need in danger because we don't care if they're doing drugs. We don't care if they sleep on the sidewalk. We don't care if they get care, right? And so that by itself is an injustice to them. Then we go to the store owner that has, we're going to move our business because we can't stop them from coming in and stealing stuff. We don't want to hold them accountability for that. We have the officers who are going like, our hands are tied. We can't do anything. And that, obviously during the COVID, that made it even worse. But it's starting to come back slowly, right, to where, you know, even when my wife went downtown, she saw it, it's looking better. Things are turning around. But there's still some areas, I think it's finally starting to turn to where the higher ups are saying like, if we don't turn it around, we're going to start, because now the business people are going like, hey, we still want it to be the big city, but we have to take care of everyone, just not special interest. So it's starting to come back. I think the officers are becoming more proactive, you know, so even the police chief, Adrian Diaz, I got videos of him coming out and rolling with us during Arrestling. It's kind of funny because I go back, oh, there you are, right? So he understands it, but again, you have to give service to everyone. And I think now that they're starting to chip away at what can we really do and make it equal for everyone, I think we're there, but it's going to take years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Don, thank you very much. Appreciate the interview.
Thank you for having me.